Well, Isaiah, it's the end of the week. Welcome.
I miss the days when we used to do this with tequila. I don't know what happened.
That will get edited out. But no, it's great to see you here.
It's great to be
for
here.
everyone who doesn't remember, you're a manager on our NetSuite team.
That's right.
You lead people, companies through massive transformations by implementing what NetSuite calls business management software, and what is more universally understood as an ERP.
An ERP, yeah.
Even though ERP is really
Also-
not a great...
Also meaningless.
Yeah,
Yeah.
also meaningless.
At the end of the day, ERP is accounting software, which is central to basically everything that a business does
Absolutely.
at any scale, no matter what business you're in, whether you have physical goods or not. And because accounting is so central to what every business does, it naturally followed through the development of ERP software like NetSuite that you would grow your software functionality around the accounting process. And where we are at today is where the software suite built around this cloud-based accounting infrastructure does everything from inventory management to
Payroll.
to
I know.
yeah, everything.
Everything.
Absolutely everything.
And yet, that of course would be a huge topic if we wanted to get into all of that. That would be an 8-hour podcast.
Yeah, and it is
no
the end of the
one would
week,
listen.
and I don't want to sit around for that.
No one will barely listen to this one, even if we keep it at 20 minutes. But there is something interesting that I want to talk about with you today.
Yes.
That I know has a lot to do with some of the recent projects you've been on. And we always like to narrow in, and we want to focus on something. And so the premise of this is going to be, I'm a client, I manufacture things. But of course, I actually, in my manufacturing process, rely on outside subcontractors to perform sub-manufacturing processes for me. And the example we're going to give, just to set an image in everyone's head, because it's relevant, is let's say I make jeans for a living, right?
Yes. And for now, are we talking about one size and color of jeans, or are we talking
I
about...
only want to talk about one size and color
One
of
size
jeans,
and color,
and then
okay.
we'll get into the complexities, the pink unicornness of size and color. So I'm a jeans manufacturer, and I'm implementing. I hire Isaiah. I say, Isaiah, save me. I want NetSuite's ERP.
Yeah.
What is complicated about the fact that I have an outsourced solution when it comes to actually manufacturing jeans?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a actual manufacturing standpoint, it's way more complicated to manufacture jeans in-house than it is to hire someone to manufacture them.
Wait,
and that's not
why do you say that?
Well, it's not my area of expertise, but I assume it's harder to make jeans in your own plant than it is to call somebody up and
I
have
bet
them
it's more
make jeans for you.
expensive.
Yes. Yeah. Probably upfront costs way more. Anyway, from a software and accounting standpoint, which is what we're here to talk about,
Yep.
it actually becomes a little bit more complicated when you are leveraging a vendor to do part of your manufacturing. And the reason is because the ownership and costs associated with the inputs and the outputs, the raw materials and the finished goods, are more complicated depending on what your requirements are. So I might, as a client like you're describing, own the raw materials, ship them to my vendor. That vendor then turns them into something else, and then I own the finished goods. And I need to incorporate the raw materials cost and the fees associated with my vendors, the charges that I'm incurring from my vendors into the cost of goods sold, the inventory asset valuation of the things that are being built. So
Right.
I'm tracking inventory, I'm potentially tracking inventory value, and I'm tracking turning raw materials into finished goods, but it's all happening kind of outside of my view. I need to account for it, and I need to be able to track it.
Let's first of all,
Yeah.
let's pretend very simple example.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say I'm a retailer, and everyone knows that Charles jeans, they're the most fashionable jeans. Everybody's dying to get a pair of Charles jeans
Yeah.
that are just cut so brilliantly, and but I don't make the jeans, right? I design them. I go to sleep at night and I dream jeans.
Right,
And
the
I
IP
keep back
is yours,
pockets.
the branding
IP
is yours,
Everything's
yeah.
mine. But then I go and I outsource the entire thing to one factory, right? Acme Jeans Makers.
Yep.
And they're the ones who I'm going to buy the fabric because I control that. Like it's very important for me to have the quality control of the fabric. And then and physically what I'm going to do, I'm going to ship it to Acme Jeans. I'm going to say, go make me 1,000 pairs of jeans.
Yep.
Size 32 because that's my waist, of course, as everyone knows.
Yes.
I'm 32, have been for years.
It's on the walls here.
It's on the walls.
Just in case you forget.
It's a verified, accurate measurement.
We're all about data-driven decisions.
We're all about integrity and data, and my waist size is certainly going to be the most integral a number I give out. No, but so I say make 1,000 jeans.
Yep.
They're going to receive the fabric.
Yep.
They're going to cut the jeans. They're going to do the sewing. They're going to put the zipper on. They're going to do the buttons. They're going to do the little rivets.
Right. They're going to send you, at the end of the day, a couple weeks later, they're going to send you a truck with 1,000 jeans.
1,000 jeans.
Yep.
Okay. Physically, that seems obvious, right?
Obvious, yep.
And then from a payment perspective, let's not even get into the accounting at ERP yet.
Yep.
Just on a caveman payment perspective, well, what is Acme Jeans charging me? They're charging me for the labor and everything that
right.
went into the manufacture of the jeans.
Right. And you've
right?
hit the nail on the
They're a service provider.
Exactly. And you've hit the nail on the biggest complexity, which is that you are buying jeans from a vendor, but you aren't paying them for jeans. You're paying them for the labor associated with making the jeans.
That is exactly why that's the crux of the thing we want to get to, which
right.
is in another environment, okay, typical wholesaler, right? If I was just a retailer and I went to a wholesaler, I would buy 1,000 pairs of jeans and I'd buy the actual jeans.
And you're paying for jeans.
What does this invoice represent? The invoice represents the cost of acquiring physical, durable, well, let's hope durable, assets, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, like I, the designer, I bought the fabric. I shipped it over to them, right? And let's say I went and I bought the zippers. Like I provided in our arguments all the raw materials required because I wanted to specify them, right? I wanted to control that.
Yep.
And I'm just paying for the service, which brings up this really interesting question. Who owns the inventory when it's at Acme Brick?
Right.
What's the answer?
Well,
Acme Brick. Sorry, that's a real company. Yeah. Acme Jeans.
Right. The really annoying consulting answer is it depends. But in this case, we're assuming, I think, that you purchased the raw material.
Yeah.
If there's leftover fabric at the end of the day,
I have it.
They're gonna send it back to you with the 1,000 jeans.
Yeah.
So that fabric belongs to you. It might be proprietary.
The scraps, but
they can keep the scraps, whatever. So you have to, on your balance sheet, you have to have the inventory asset value
That's the key thing
of the fabric.
Right.
And that inventory value needs to go away when that fabric gets turned into jeans and be incorporated alongside the fees you're paying your vendor into the asset value of the jeans that you own.
Right.
At the contract manufacturer's location, in transit, whatever.
The fabric cost of 1,000 jeans is not that big, right? So I should have chosen a bigger number to make this more exciting.
Yeah, probably.
But the point is, let's say the fabric cost for that 1,000 jeans is about $100.
Yeah.
Let's just say, argument's sake. The point you're making, I think, that's really interesting from an ERP perspective or how to handle outsourced manufacturing, is that when I send the $100 of asset, the inventory of fabric, to Acme Jeans, I don't erase it from my balance sheet. It's still $100 on my balance sheet.
Yep.
And I, especially if I'm an audited company, I have to provide a level of assurance that my books are accurate. I have to know where that $100 of asset is.
Yep.
So now we're starting to get into it. And then when it comes back as jeans, I no longer recognize it as fabric. It is transformed into a different asset with different costs.
Yep.
Now tell me the story.
Well, so if you had one contract manufacturer that you used to make 1,000 jeans, and that's how many jeans you made a month, you wouldn't necessarily need to do anything more complicated than keep very
Right.
careful track of this in a spreadsheet
Right.
and do your division and your multiplication as needed. We're talking about situations where you have many products,
Yeah.
many contract manufacturers, many different contract manufacturer locations, and
Yes.
all of this stuff is happening simultaneously.
Well, I see two axes of complication that
Yeah.
I would like you to. We don't have to delve into them, but to illustrate.
Yeah.
Axis one is the size color thing.
Right.
So Acme Jeans makes all my
Yeah,
jeans.
and I think we'll get there.
we'll get there,
we'll
but
get
I'm
there.
just going to state it now.
Yeah.
Now that 100 that buy me 1,000, I'm going to make 1,000 pairs of jeans. Now I'm going to say, actually, I've just bought you 3 colors of fabric,
Mm-hmm.
and from each you're going to make a specific number of size 32, size 34, size 36. There's some people I've seen. I know it's hard to believe that we're size 38. I don't know anyone, but I've seen them in the stores.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and even bigger. So now I'm sending let's say 3 fabric inventories
Yeah.
over to Acme Jeans. Still got to keep it accounted for, and they're all going to come back. Each one of them of those fabric inventories are going to return to me
Yeah.
as 6 different SKUs,
Right.
or 12 or 20 different SKUs.
Right. You have a many-to-many relationship between the raw materials, the manufacturers, and the outputs.
That's
of that
one
manufacturer.
axis of complexity.
Yes.
The other axis of complexity is I'm not just making jeans. I'm making hats. I'm making handbags. I'm making all sorts of cool hip
Yeah.
stuff that everybody wants from me because I'm a brilliant designer.
Yeah.
And that involves now many manufacturers. So picture from that 100 pairs of jeans, it's an asset on your books, $100 of fabric. It is now at the manufacturer. It's still your asset.
Yep.
And then it comes back transformed, and you need to account for that transformation.
And potentially, I'm just going to introduce one other small
Yeah.
thing, and potentially send that product that has been manufactured out again to do another step in the manufacturing process with a different contract manufacturer.
Acid
washing jeans is a great example.
distressing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I cannot. But I have children. They when we were young, it was
You
cool.
only wear 32 dark blue non-acid wash jeans.
32 no belt required jeans.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
has been for 25 years now. It's
Yeah.
pretty amazing. So now, okay, so we've pictured that we have all this inventory sitting outside across multiple manufacturers
Yep.
who are providing services to me, and then they return transformed products, finished goods products.
Yep.
But potentially, as you just said, finished goods or WIP.
Yep.
That will actually be going WIP is
work
a work
in progress.
or progress that will actually be going back out for yet another transformation or
Yep.
modification. And each time I own whatever the inventory is, I must value the inventory and keep a track of where everything. Okay.
Yeah.
So now.
Yeah. Well, there's good news and bad news in the world of ERP. The
Yeah.
good news with outsourced manufacturing is that this is by and large a solved problem.
Right, because it's so
If I
common.
were purchasing the jeans from a vendor and I didn't have to track any of the inputs to that manufacturing process and I only owned the inventory once I received it, it would be a purchase order and an item receipt. Those are
Right.
the words that we use in our world.
Right.
And if I were manufacturing it in-house
Yeah.
and I wasn't using an outsourced manufacturer,
Yeah.
I was doing everything myself, it would be a work order
Yes.
and a assembly build.
Yes.
Right? Those are the kind of transaction
Yes.
flows that would represent if these things were separate.
And wait,
Yep.
just on that second case, because I think the second case is good to just focus on. If it's a work order, all right, with some sort of assembly or bill of materials or something associated to the work order, what happens is when I go from my raw material inputs to my finished goods output, the output, and you tell me if I'm wrong, because I'm just guessing at this, but I think I've got it. The output gets no. See, why are you laughing?
No. Yeah.
The output gets costed as, just to keep it simple, raw materials, labor, some sort of depreciation for the equipment used and things
Yep.
like that,
Yep.
right? Like some other
If you
fixed
want.
costs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have that, but now if instead of me doing the jeans, I send it to Acme Jeans, they come back with an invoice saying, hey,
Right.
you owe me X amount of dollars.
Right.
How would that get
Right. The tools available at our disposal in the NetSuite world and the ERP world allow us to do this with incredible ease. You take this concept of the purchase order and the charges associated with dealing with a vendor and a work order where you're turning something into something else or many things into something else, and you marry them together. And what the accounting system and what the transactional system is able to do is say, I know that this is a fee on this purchase order, but it's associated with a work order at an outsourced location. When I receive this purchase order and eventually get a vendor bill from my vendor for the fees, in tandem with that transaction flow, which is part of what we call procure to pay, I'm also executing a work order completion, or an assembly build to say the inventory value of the raw materials has gone down in addition to the inventory quantity, the balance of those raw materials, and the inventory value and quantity has gone up on the finished goods side or the WIP side. So at its most basic, this is a totally solved problem, and one of the many, many benefits of moving to a mature system like NetSuite, in that this thing that's very difficult to account for and has many moving parts is something that you can capture out of the box with basic transaction features in the system.
And at a certain scale, you just have to do it that way, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
Right? Because that is how you're going to keep control of your business.
Otherwise, you're adjusting in and out inventory at $0 and then assigning value to it only once you get vendor bills in, and you can add those invoices to your system, and it's a nightmare. And it's a nightmare we solve on a very regular basis.
Right. Now let me ask you this, though. Let's just say...
Bad news.
Sorry?
The bad news.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say the bad news here is that requires maintenance of data where the execution is very simple because the tools are at your disposal, but the maintenance of data can be very complex. My outsourced manufacturing locations need to be in the system. If I have, let's say, a 10-step manufacturing process with different vendors, each of the items in each of the WIP stages of that development of that manufacturing process needs to be captured by a different item in the system, so that I can say, here's my fabric, it gets turned into cut fabric, that cut fabric gets turned into sewn fabric, now they're jeans. So at the cutting stage they might not have sizes, but now at the sewing stage they do have sizes. So the good news is, from a transactional, from a what happens perspective, it's very, very simple and a solved problem. But when you're talking about teams of people that don't necessarily have somebody who can learn and own that process as like a full-time job, you need to find easier and more simple ways to capture that.
So let's just let's paint this picture so everyone understands, mostly me. If I am Airbus or Boeing, some of the most complex manufacturing on planet Earth, right? I have a human infrastructure.
Yes.
Teams who are so just devoted to this problem. Yeah. As I shrink down in company size, as I get to a smaller company who's on the cusp of needing an ERP.
Yep.
And they're only successful because they have a relatively complex manufacturing process.
Yes.
Because it's not everybody. No one's going to make a business just bottling tap water unless you're Coca-Cola.
And by the way, just sorry not to interrupt, but I think you've just described every burgeoning Shopify apparel brand
100%
in the world right now.
Apparel brand, kombucha, functional soda.
Yep.
I mean, you think about across all the consumer goods, all of these emerging brands are generally doing something extra complicated in order to find space in the consumer's mind.
And it's a fantastic thing that we live in a world in which the costs associated with doing those very, very complex things or the upfront costs at least, have gone down to the point where there are people all over the place doing really, really interesting and complex things with brands online.
Ends. That's a great point. It's on both ends, though. It's the cost of getting into the business, but it's also now access to consumers. Where shelf space is digital, so these brands can get to you. It is a beautiful thing.
And warehousing and manufacturing is now something that you don't have to buy a manufacturing plant in order to make jeans. You can hire somebody.
But you do need to, because you're going to have investors regardless of what, you still need to be able to track costs somehow. And you're not going to be able to necessarily, you're not going to want or be able to necessarily absolutely capture exactly that manufacturing process, so that if I want to make a beautiful pair of jeans, and to do that I need it to go through 4 different WIP processes. Do I really want to create work order 1, work order 2, work order 3, work order 4? Like, I don't
Right.
have the staff to do that.
And in the case of sizes and colors, do you want to create 4 work orders, 1 for each part of the process, and then 20 in each of those columns
It's
for each combination of your
80 work
inseam and
orders.
your color?
Right,
Yeah.
and it seems like overkill. So
Seems
what do
like
I do
overkill.
then, Isaiah?
Well, that's where you need somebody really creative, not to be doing too much of
Oh,
a sales
boy.
pitch here, but it's where you need somebody really creative and who knows the system well, but also who understands what is doable and not doable within a system for, you know, a given team size and a given set of expertise and a given level of skill to adapt the tools that exist in the system that make something like outsourced manufacturing a solved problem, but also help to, with customization, with a reduction in complexity of transaction flow, get there in a couple of button clicks. And it's about understanding the exact requirements, making assumptions that are valid and that are validated with the client and with the users themselves, not just necessarily the people on the accounting side who have embarked upon the ERP implementation. And in the case of a recent project, I you know, which I think is what
Yeah.
we want to talk about and what I want to share is we treated the color, size, inseam, apparel complexity the way that it's supposed to be treated, and we embarked upon the master data project of getting all of that stuff in the system with its complexity, but we were not willing to then say, for every in-between stage in the process, build me a WIP item for every combination of color, inseam, whatever your attributes
So then
are.
what did you do?
Well, what we ended up doing is we ended up capturing the costs associated with those manufacturing stages as we would capture freight or tariffs. It's in the NetSuite world, at least, it's called landed costs. So what that allowed us to do is to create these purchase orders for the fees, again, not for the finished goods, purchase orders for the fees associated with the contract manufacturing, and then by quantity, dividing those total fees by the quantities on our eventual, you know, finished good receipts, apply automatically the percentage of that fee to the asset value of the thing that you are building, that you received eventually into your warehouse or your 3PL.
So just let me think about this. If I'm in stage 2,
Yeah.
is that product still essentially just a raw material?
It can be.
And then it's only once it becomes a finished good that I take the charges of all 4 stages.
Yep.
And then upcharge the costs that way.
Yes.
Is that a fair way of saying it?
Absolutely. Ultimately, what you are responsible for is tracking your inventory, especially when it exists in your warehouse and is sellable to your customers, and that the value of that inventory, both for your inventory asset account and for the eventual cost of goods sold associated with those sales, is accurate and is based on actually how much it costs to get that pair of jeans or whatever
Right.
it is into your warehouse.
You know, because we've already spent our time.
Oh.
I'm telling you, that's
It
what
goes by
you,
fast.
You have to do really.
When you're talking about something
but
as
actually,
sexy
there's,
as this.
there's two great things that I want to just remind everyone as conclusions to this. The first, I think, for the average person who's would be inclined to listen to this,
Right.
understanding how outsourced manufacturing gets costed in an ERP, I think is a very, very excellent just primer and base lesson. I've learned a lot just in preparing for this and going through this conversation. So that's wonderful. The other thing, though, sort of implicit, I'll say it, implicit in this is that this is actually something you've said before in an all hands. There's a lot of judgment when implementing an ERP system. Remember, I think the analogy you were using once was around a map.
Yep.
And how so much information could be could be represented on a map, and that there's a point at which too much information represented on the map eventually means you have no information because you can't decipher what is going on. And when you're making business choices about what to implement with your ERP or how to implement your ERP, you've got to understand what is the view you need in order for you to make proper business decisions. And that is not a technical thing. That is a judgment call based on a lot of experience. As you said in this podcast, it helps to have a deep understanding of the system you're implementing to know what's possible. And then to make the right judgment call of, am I going overboard and therefore will actually create too much noise in the system and render the system,
or just create too much work.
Right.
And a given team at their current scale and level of skill, they're just not going to be able to use the system, and they're going to reject the project.
Reject the project. You're exactly right.
All too often, we as software implementers make the mistake of implementing the software rather than implementing the processes.
Not at LID, but
not
it happens. It happens
in the
elsewhere.
world of software.
In the world of software, yeah.
And making sure that you are introducing exactly the right level of complexity such that the project is achievable and you can grow with a scalable tool is as important as choosing the right tool. If not
100%.
way more important than choosing the right tool.
I think it's way more important, actually.
At the beginning of the day.
It's way more important.
Yeah.
This was a great conversation. I
Thank you
really
for having
appreciate it. I thank you. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Enjoy your weekend.
Night. Yeah. Are you going to go to your running club?
That's during the week.
Oh, that's
but
too
maybe.
bad. Maybe you'll squeeze in a pleasure run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For fun.
Yeah. That sounds great.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.